Imagine a world where emotions are unpredictable, where self identity feels like a constantly shifting mirage. This is the reality for people that experience BPD. And today I want to bring a conversation to light around borderline personality disorder because I feel like all of the chit chat right now is around narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, and toxic relationship that's really targeted towards men, where borderline personality disorder is also a personality disorder that can be incredibly toxic. Now, some people that do have borderline personality disorder do and can have narcissistic personality disorder. So today I wanted to break down the difference between the two. Again, that 75% of people that have borderline personality disorder are women. And oftentimes in the conversations around narcissism, which is such a buzzword on social media right now, and toxicity in relationship dynamics, everybody just jumps to the conclusion that everybody's a narcissist. And there are specific criteria that one has to meet in order to be somebody with NPD. The other thing that's really important to understand is that most people have narcissistic traits. It's the gravity of them, it's the dosing of them that makes them more toxic. So today I do want to dive into some of the notes that I have around the differences between narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. I also want to say I am not a clinical professional at this time. I am a graduate student studying clinical psychology with a fascination of personality disorders, relationship dynamics, and many other interests. So I am continuing to navigate and learn. So if you are a clinical psychologist or you are a psychologist listening to this and there's more context or information that I'm missing, please feel free to leave a comment. Don't attack me, okay? I'm just a student, and my goal is to shed light on some of the conversations that we're not having around toxicity, relationship dynamics, and things that actually can contribute to that, as well as other psychological disorders that I find fascinating, interesting, and that we need to bring more light to. So as we get into this, I do have my notes on my desktop, so I'll be referencing those frequently just to make sure that I am reporting the information that I found correctly. So with that, we're going to dive into the differences between narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Now, before we dive into this, if you're new to the channel, hi, my name is Kate Ann Michelle. I am a fitness professional, and I have a strong passion for psychology and overall well-being outside of just the aesthetic stuff that most people chase. So if you're interested in learning more about bridging the gap between psychology and physiology to cultivate long-term transformation, then click that like button, click the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more content to come. But let's get into it. So I just want to draw some similarities and contrasts between people with BPD and people with NPD. The first thing to understand is that people with BPD really struggle with abandonment issues, whereas somebody with narcissistic personality disorder is really feeding their ego through narcissistic supply. They also tend to be wildly insecure. For people with BPD, their emotions are variable and really intense. They can go from idealization to discarding you pretty quickly. Again, to avoid their fear of you abandoning them, they will just simply abandon you. Now, people with NPD tend to be pretty mild in their emotions, except for pretty strong rage. If you've ever met somebody who is a narcissist or you've dated somebody who is narcissistic, you know that they go from 0 to 100 rapidly. People with BPD, again, have a strong fear of abandonment, whereas people with NPD have pervasive senses of grandiosity. You've probably heard of love bombing. Very, very common in somebody that has narcissistic personality disorder. People with BPD really, really struggle with emotional regulation and their sense of identity. So they can have suicidal ideation and tend to engage in self-harm. Whereas people with NPD have a sense that they are entitled to the best of literally everything. And the people in their lives are just placeholders to help them get to where they want to go. They manipulate people very frequently, and they don't really care about how it impacts the other person. They have a very low, if any, sense of empathy. And even if they know what they're doing is probably wrong, they don't necessarily feel bad about doing it. People with BPD outwardly exhibit feelings of abandonment. woundedness and vulnerability, whereas people with NPD tend to just exploit others and don't really have that intimacy with their partners or other people unless it's to manipulate them and leverage them later on, which you've probably experienced if you've ever dated somebody who is narcissistic or has true NPD. People with BPD can experience dissociation, whereas people with NPD have an exaggerated sense of importance. Everything is about them all the time, no matter what. Their feelings are the most important. If you've ever dated somebody who is a narcissist, you will recognize that everything, regardless of whether you are part of it or not, is totally your fault and your problem to fix, regardless of whether you had any hand in it or not. People with borderline personality disorder have an unstable sense of self. Like I said earlier, they tend to shift their identities, their career paths, even their values can change over time, or in and out, hot and cold, right? They're constantly a chameleon trying to mold to a sense of self and stability, yet they totally fear anybody abandoning them. So they tend to just move on to the next version of themselves constantly. So instability in jobs, instability in career paths tends to be a behavioral thing that we can notice in people that have borderline personality disorder. Whereas people with narcissistic personality disorder just have this strong, arrogant sense of superiority to everybody around them. This is why one of the biggest red flags that you'll see in somebody that has a narcissistic personality disorder is they tend to really talk down to people like restaurant servers, hostesses, the doorman, the mailman, people that do have really important jobs. I mean, we wouldn't have the society that we do without them participating in making that happen. Yet narcissists just see them as, you are here to serve me. And if there's something wrong, you did it on purpose. It's your fault. Side tangent, I'll never forget one of the first dates I went on with somebody. I remember that the server that was waiting on us, again, she didn't set the table. She had no part in this, but the wine glass had a fingerprint and he threw a tantrum towards this woman, this poor woman. It was like, we need new ones. This is unacceptable. He wanted the dinner for free. It was wild to see. And I remember sitting there just being so apologetic because I couldn't fathom that this was happening right here in front of me, that he would treat somebody that had no hand in what was happening that way. So huge red flag is they will definitely treat people that they see as lower level individuals compared to them. Like they just don't have feelings or something. They're not human. I don't know. It's really, really, really heartbreaking to actually witness. So people with borderline personality disorder tend to have chronic feelings of emptiness, whereas people with narcissistic personality disorder tend to just have no empathy at all. They don't feel bad. I mentioned that earlier, but it's really a key element of narcissistic personality disorder is they do not have empathy. They don't have the ability to relate to another person's emotional state and feel for them in the experiences that they're having. People with borderline personality disorder seem to genuinely have an interest in other people, whereas people with narcissistic personality disorder do not try to really get to know one another. They're not really that vulnerable. They're not going to go that deep. They're not going to talk about their childhood or things that mean anything to them, maybe because nothing means anything to them. I don't know. But they only will do that. So they'll only try to create that vulnerability and intimacy with you if you're their partner or their target for narcissistic supply, because they want to leverage you to get what they ultimately want. Maybe you're the arm candy or the trophy wife, the thing that makes them look good, right? You're a prop. You're not a human. You are a prop or a belonging to these people that makes them and their sense of self just look so much better. Now, there are some similarities here. So I do think it's important to discuss some of these things that tend to cross over. Because like I said earlier, there are people with borderline personality disorder that can also have narcissistic personality disorder, which is the craziest roller coaster ride you've ever been on if you've ever dated somebody with this combination of character traits. It's the most confusing time of your life. And I say that as somebody who has indeed dated somebody who has this combination of personality character traits. So just know if you're somebody who feels like their world is upside down and you can't even think what the hell just happened to you, even if it was a short period of time, it can feel like years when you've dated somebody like this. I felt like I aged 10 years after dating somebody like this for about 6 months. It was the most upside down world experience I've ever had. And if you've ever truly been gaslit by somebody, you know how confusing and just overwhelmingly complex that entire experience can feel. Like afterwards, you're just trying to ruminate and put the puzzle pieces together and make sense of something that, unfortunately, you'll never be able to make sense of. So both people rely on other people to manage functions that most of us are able to manage ourselves, right? People with borderline personality disorder tend to look to others to manage their mood, while people with narcissistic personality disorder want others to prop up their self-esteem. That's what you are there for. Both parties, both people with narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, tend to live in totally different realities, which feelings create their facts. How they feel about something is factual. Whereas anybody that's ever been in science, I definitely grew up and got my education in the sciences, knows that facts don't actually care about your feelings at all. So there you go. Both will project their bad feelings onto other people and blame them for the experience that they're having in their internal world, right? This is where you'll see them lash out or blame other people. You made me feel this way. You made me do this, right? Because you did this, now I feel this way. I remember clearly that the guy that I had dated, that I'm thinking of as I talk about this, he had told me that if he was jealous, it was my fault, that I have done something wrong that made him feel that way. In any negative emotion, if he was upset, I did something wrong. If he was having a bad time at something, it was my fault somehow, some way, even if I wasn't in the proximity or we didn't really talk that day. It was just the most weird and uncomfortable thing. But being somebody who genuinely thought I loved this person, it's, like I said, it's a total mindfuck. They tend to blame everybody but themselves. They don't take personal responsibility or ownership over anything, and they will never admit that they're wrong. Now, if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody who is narcissistic, they don't actually focus on finding a solution with you. It's not about that. It's not coming to a conclusion where you both have agreement. When people with narcissistic personality disorder argue with you, they're arguing to win. There is no, let's find a way to get through this and move past it. It's, this is your fault, and I will remind you of this every single time I'm upset. Because if I'm upset, it's because you did something, and if I can't think of anything immediately that you've done, I will always remind you of the thing that you did that made me pissed off the very first time. They don't move on, they don't get over it, and there is no solution. You will hear about everything you've ever done to upset this person over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And some of them are things you didn't do. That's where the gaslighting comes in, and it can be, like I said, a complete mindfuck. Now, both of these personality disorders can be critical and judgmental. Both have to be right, like I said, at all times. They're not going to take responsibility for their words or their actions, and their words are important. A lot of people don't understand the gravity of words. And sure, people can say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Words cut like a knife. And if you know how harmful your words are, again, going back to somebody who's dated somebody who is narcissistic, they will take those moments of vulnerability to kind of where they're gathering information that they can use to manipulate you later on, and then turn that against you in the most hurtful way. When you confide in somebody about your deepest wounds or your past history or things that you're still working through or things that you have some guilt or shame around, and they can leverage that to throw it in your face later on down the road, I hope that you know that that is not a healthy relationship and that you deserve better. That is not your fault, and nobody should be looking to get dirt on you that they can then throw in your face later on. Both can carry grudges, and this is huge. Like I said, if something happens where you've upset them, they're not going to get past it. They're not going to just get over it. They're not going to just forget it. They will remind you of it every day for the rest of your life, and it will never end, regardless of how long it's been or whether you thought you found a resolution there. I promise you, it will be brought right back up the next time that they're upset, even if it's not with you. They're just mad. It's your fault somehow. And they also will always see themselves as victims. Like I said, they don't take ownership. They can't say that they were wrong. They don't apologize for things. It's just your fault. And they also don't want to hear anything that doesn't agree with what they believe. Like I said, their feelings come before facts. So if you bring them evidence, it's made up, it's not true, what they're saying is right, and you're just trying to hurt them by questioning or challenging a concept, idea, or fact that they've presented to you, because they have to make it fit their story. It doesn't matter what the reality of the situation is. Again, going back to gaslighting, they have an internal story of what's happening. And even with evidence, there's no way that you can change their mind. They will inevitably falsify the evidence or say that it didn't happen or make up some other story just to make sure that you understand that they're right. Both will lie. Both parties struggle. Again, if you're somebody who worries about abandonment, then you want to make sure that you're telling the right story so that people aren't upset with you, and you kind of tell the story so much that you believe it, and then your identity gets entangled into it, and then there you are, or you do get abandoned, or you abandon them, like you discard them, and then you move on to the next shape-shifting identity that you can fit yourself into. Both feel a great sense of shame, which can be seen specifically in the manifestation of self-harm with people who have borderline personality disorder. Now, both will also try to control people in their environment to feel safe. Remember that somebody that has abandonment issues and large levels of insecurity, right? The power struggle dynamic is typically what we see, right? So you have somebody who's kind of super grandiose, super confident, and they tend to attach to people that are more insecure, have lower levels of self-esteem, and that's because they can control those people, right? You don't typically see people with secure attachment attached to people that have these personality disorders. Secure attachment attracts secure attachment, and toxic attachment attracts toxic attachment. And this is kind of what we see in these dynamics, right? If you're subscribed to my Sunday sermon newsletter, then I've done a whole thing on the anxious avoidant dynamic and how toxicity cultivates from that. So if you're not subscribed, feel free. But they want to control and manage the emotional stability of the other party. And like I said earlier, narcissistic personality disorder, individuals who have that will use that to prop up their own self-esteem. Now, they both also need a ton of attention. They tend to be more anxious with where they are, what you're doing. They tend to want to check up on you. These are the people that will text you throughout the day. Why didn't you respond? I remember one day I had like 27 missed calls and over 100 text messages because I was on back-to-back calls with my clients that I work with, and I wasn't on my phone. I try not to have my phone in my office when I'm working, but either way, it was catastrophic. Nothing was wrong. It was just I was working, but that was just a huge fight with not prioritizing what's most important, which was him, obviously. How could I forget? Now, both can also be very mentally and emotionally abusive. Verbal abuse is really strong in these dynamics. And depending on the temperament and the rage in the narcissist, this can lead to domestic violence. Now, I also want to bring to light that women with borderline personality disorder can also abuse men. Now, we don't think about men being abused when it comes to domestic violence. I think it's really important to note that while we tend to hyper-focus on narcissistic personality disorder when we're having these conversations, women can be just as violent and toxic in a dynamic as men can. And pointing the finger at men is wrong and not accurate, regardless of your feelings, okay? Women can be just as toxic, just as dangerous, just as manipulative as men, and shedding light on that, I think, is really important. Now, again, this is not to just now speculate that everybody's either BPD or NPD. There are plenty of really stable individuals. They're probably not the people that are all over TikTok or Instagram and, all of that stuff. We do see an uptick in these types of dynamics, especially with social media. And I'll probably do another YouTube video on the impact of social media on mental well-being, because I can definitely say I don't think it's helping. But if you enjoy today's video and painting the differences between these two personality disorders, please feel free to click that like and subscribe button if you want to learn more. As I learn more through my graduate program and my research, I'll be sharing more about personality disorders, relationship dynamics, toxicity, attachment styles, and of course, things that I also work with in the health and fitness arena, such as body image issues, emotional eating, and eating disorders specifically. Now, I do want to make sure that, again, I am not claiming to be an expert. I am simply a graduate student who has got a fascination for these ideas, these topics, and hopefully shedding light on these conversations. So if you're going to attack me, I'm probably just not going to respond. I know that YouTube can be a pretty hairy place for people that tend to lash out. Feel free to talk to somebody about that. You shouldn't be yelling at strangers on the internet, even if you disagree. But if I did say something wrong, again, please feel free to start that conversation. I don't ever want to put out misinformation. That is not my goal. I'm not here just to get a bunch of clicks and get everybody riled up over stuff that's not actually true. So feel free to correct me if I've missed something in here or you want to add to the conversation. I'd love to be able to do that. I do host a podcast if you ever wanted to come on and have this conversation live where I can learn, or we can have this conversation that's educational to other people who are really interested in these topics. But I will leave this video here. Have an awesome hump day, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.